Vladimir Putin is now confronted with a greater home threat as a result of Russia assembling 300,000 additional soldiers to bolster its front lines in Ukraine. Like all other autocrats, Putin relies on a small number of political elites to keep him in power. Hardliners among them want Putin to make further sacrifices to win the conflict. Others who are moderates, who agree that the war has been detrimental and would prefer for Putin to put an end to it. You might believe that the threat to Putin's position comes from the latter group. After all, if Ukraine continues to succeed in its counterattacks despite the strengthened Russian front, the moderates will have a greater urge to withdraw Russian soldiers, stop the bloodshed, and restore some sort of stability to Russia's economy. In fact, the last coup in Moscow took place in August 1991, when images were far grainier. It was people who were dissatisfied with the status quo who instigated this failed attempt to overthrow Mikhail Gorbachev. Gorbachev could advise us to focus our attention on the group of unhappy people if he was still around today. But let's focus on how the hardliners give Putin a more challenging second issue right now. Everything starts with the problems brought on by Russia's mobilization. The goal of the mobilization, in theory, is to fortify Russia's front lines, as Ukraine is steadily outnumbering Russia and advancing on its counterattack. Putin is hoping that the surge of troops would enable Russia to maintain control over the crucial land bridge that leads to Crimea, even if Ukraine recaptures Kherson and makes more gains in the north. If it succeeds, Putin's issues will be miraculously resolved, making the remainder of this discussion irrelevant. There are, however, a lot of reasons to believe that the current strategy will fail. The first problem is that Russia may actually be in far worse military shape than is now the case. The control line before to the counterattack may be seen here fairly. To safeguard Kherson, however, Russia's army deployment appeared more like this. Ukraine focused its forces on the undefended area and reclaimed the northern sector. However, according to US intelligence, Russia's military leadership is unhappy with this strategy and weirdly feels that it is too aggressive. Zooming in on Kherson, the city itself is occupied by Russian forces, but the front lines are located farther away, slightly near the Oblast border. Military strategists would rather completely withdraw from the city and its surroundings. The amount of artillery launched by Ukraine has rendered the Dnieper River crossings impassable. Therefore, if the ultimate conflict goes poorly for Russia and Ukraine attacks Kherson, Moscow will lose nearly all of its personnel and equipment in the process. Consider subscribing for more news from World at Peace. The Russian military had a poor result as a result. Putin wants to remain, though, as he is concerned about the political message that would be delivered if Russia left the city. Additionally, it appears that drafted soldiers are scarcely receiving any training, demonstrating the urgent need for reinforcements at the front lines. Defense requires less training than offense, thus those called up immediately will likely act as cannon fodder until better trained troops can arrive. Another unanswered question is who will instruct them. Because there are already so many Russian officers in Ukraine, future soldiers might not receive enough training. The related military equipment is also subpar, or totally lacking due to economic sanctions that shut down the small industry Russia possessed at the outset of the conflict. The ease with which Russia will be able to locate the 300,000 they are seeking also raises worries. Russian citizens depart by car, train, and maybe by air. Hour-long lines may be found at border checkpoints, and all flights out of the nation are fully booked. There are still rumors that Russia is sealing its borders to prevent potential soldiers from leaving in a revival of the Iron Barrier from the Cold War. And those rumors only make people want to go more quickly. Ironically, closing the borders needs military force to enforce, thus depleting supplies for the Ukrainian front lines. The possibility exists that the entire mobilization will never take place. There are more and more protests in the streets of Russia, and it is understandable why. Safety in numbers is essential during protests. The government faces a challenge in suppressing the population as long as there are significantly more civilians than security personnel on the streets. Sometimes seemingly insignificant acts can yet provoke widespread outrage. It was a street hawker who set himself on fire during the Arab Spring. It was the death of a lady in police detention for breaking hijab laws that sparked the ongoing protests in Iran. Although neither of the latter two problems immediately raised worries for the demonstrators' physical safety, they still ended up on the streets. Russia's impending threat to the lives of its mobilized soldiers raises the relative tolerance for risk associated with protesting. Therefore, it will be challenging for Russian security forces to put an end to the local resistance activities on a long-term basis. So imagine that a disaster results from the mobilization. What Putin does next is the question. He is definitely in trouble. He might disappear into thin air, but it's more likely that he will make one last effort to hold on to power. The inner circle plays a role in this situation. We don't actually understand the balance or the internal divisions. Because it is more convenient, I am standing in for the hardliners using the flag of the Russian armed forces because they logically favor a military solution, even if it is a better one than what is currently taking place. And I'm utilizing the relative moderates flag from the FSB. As an intelligence agency, they might want to go back to their clandestine manipulation of Ukraine in 2014, employing little green men to sway events. There are probably likely components of both inside the regime, whatever the precise balance may be. Now put yourself in Putin's shoes, and the war has been a catastrophe. You will need a scapegoat if you don't want a popular rebellion against you. The obvious choice, in this case, is the hardliners. They are held accountable because they sought to start the invasion from the beginning. And because of this, the hardliners are in a pickle. The hardliners have a perilous choice to make if they believe Putin is poised to purge them. Start a coup. The risk here is that if the coup fails, the plotters could end up in jail or worse. Nevertheless, admitting failure would probably just result in a shameful retirement. The end result is that a successful coup would enable them to maintain control, so elevating one of them to the position of head of state, and would grant them the freedom to conduct the war as they see appropriate. That entails leaving vulnerable areas like Kherson, and instead acting in areas where they are militarily favored because they are free from Putin's political restraints. Of course, that does not ensure sustained success. They would need to suppress any moderate elites who could step out to back Putin. While the nation is experiencing severe instability, they would also need to organize it without sparking a full-scale popular insurrection, possibly one in Putin's favor. It is simpler to say than to do. In the meanwhile, the possibility of a coup raises a few secondary strategic issues. You could refer to the first of these as a meta-coup. To be precise, Putin is about to fire the hardliners, so they don't plan a coup. They act in this manner because they believe Putin will reject them. Although it could appear to be an academic distinction, it isn't. They might decide otherwise and plan a coup even if Putin has no intention to get rid of them. But consider this now from Putin's viewpoint. Imagine if you are not motivated to cast aside the extremists. But you've heard reports that a coup will shortly be launched by the hardliners. You now have the motivation to fire them before they get a chance to stage that coup. But consider this now from the standpoint of the hardliners. Suppose they weren't specifically seeking to get Putin removed. But they've heard stories that Putin wants to get rid of them. They might now want to act quickly and preventively. Even though there is no underlying issue between them, this logic might go on forever to the point where one side is vying to eliminate the other. Be prepared to hear media rumors about these movements in the upcoming days. After all, an informational battle needs to be waged in this situation. Realities and beliefs both have importance. Destabilizing the Russian government would consequently be advantageous for Ukraine and the West. If Putin is successful in getting rid of the hardliners, another second-order issue will emerge. Purging one of the factions provides an immediate issue if Putin is a leadership compromise between the hardliners and the moderates. Now, the other is in complete control. Now Putin can be encircled by the moderates. Additionally, they are no longer concerned about the hardliners backing Putin in the case of a peaceful coup. There is no longer anyone nearby to prevent them. They are unrestrained. This is particularly difficult if there is a clear split between the FSB and the military forces. Autocrats enjoy distributing coercive authority among several institutions so that no one can amass the power needed to rule the nation. Putin would then need to worry about finding another strategy to prevent a coup to make up for the lack of a counterbalance. Where that would originate from is unclear. The alternative is to be selective in eliminating the hardliners, picking out a select few to serve as scapegoats while still leaving enough of them in place to prevent a moderate coup. However, that limits Putin's options in a different way and might still cause issues with the remaining hardliners who are angry. Whom do you believe Putin faces the greatest internal danger from at this time? Comment below and let me know.